chat with us during the live broadcast. RPG Research Patreon supporters can access the recorded episodes a month or more before they are available to the general public as a thank you for your support. You can become a Patreon supporter by swinging by patreon.com/RPG Research. Those videos will then later be available on youtube.com/RPG Research. Role-playing game formats we discuss include the original tabletop RPG, usually referred to just as RPG or TRPG. Please, either no T's or just one T. There's no need for a second T, as in TTRPG. That's just wasteful of air and paper and typing and time. So please, just RPG or TRPG for tabletop role-playing games. Live-action role-playing games, LRPG, including LARPs. Electronic role-playing games, aka ERPG, which includes solo games and massive multiplayer online games, everything in between, VR, AR, VR, etc. And then hybrid role-playing games, HRPGs, which also include solo adventure books and modules. This episode is sponsored by the wonderful, wonderful Patreon supporters for the nonprofit RPG Research. We are also sponsored by RPG Therapeutics LLC and DOTS RPG through their kind donations to RPG Research. You can learn more about RPG Research, the nonprofit 501c3 research and human services organization, studying the effects of all role-playing game formats and their potential to help improve lives at www.rpgresearch.com. A quick little quote from them. We are helping people heal and improving the quality of life for diverse populations around the world by providing accessible and inclusive collaborative research-supported programs using music and role-playing games. Researching RPGs since 1983, providing programs in schools since 1985, in therapeutic settings and online since 2004. A 501c3 nonprofit provides an open international community, sharing, studying, and providing accessible and inclusive collaborative music and games to help improve people's lives. You can learn more about RPG Therapeutics LLC, the for-profit professional services company, at rpgtherapeutics.com. 20% of their profits are donated to RPG Research, and the book publications, the profits are donated to RPG Research. And also the nonprofit DOTS RPG at dotsrpg.com. They are kindly out there helping advocate for accessibility. They are creating Braille dice and sharing those freely, Braille textbooks, and much more. Check them out again at dotsrpg.com. Our show varies each week, but typically includes the latest general RPG news related to our focus on role-playing games and research, community response and discussion, role-playing game-related theory and application discussions, updates on communities and professionals using role-playing games throughout the world, and often special guests, the latest updates on RPG Research, the RPG Bus, the RPG Trailer, the RPG Tour, RPG Education, and many, many, many other programs that we're involved with in various degrees. And while our primary show hosts are typically Hawk Robinson and John Welker, hosts, co-hosts, and guests may vary from week to week. The RPG Talk Show will begin in a few minutes. This message may repeat. The RPG Talk Show discusses weekly news, information, commentary, discussion, and debate about the effects of all role-playing game formats and their potential uses for professional, educational, recreational, and therapeutic goals. The RPG Talk Show is not about the latest modules and releases. There are plenty of sources for that information. We will mention such releases when related to the aforementioned topics, however. You can learn more about the RPG Talk Show, hosts, guests, and archives of previous episodes on our website at rpgtalkshow.com. You can follow us on Twitter at RPG Talk Show. You can catch our show live on twitch.tv/RPG Research or on youtube.com/RPG Research, Thursdays, 4 p.m. to 5 p.m. Pacific Time, and chat with us during the live broadcast. RPG Research Patreon supporters can access the recorded episodes a month or more before they are available to the general public as a thank you for your support. You can become a Patreon supporter by swinging by patreon.com/RPG Research. Those videos will then later be available on youtube.com/RPG Research. Role-playing game formats we discuss include the original tabletop RPG, usually referred to just as RPG or TRPG. Please, either no T's or just one T. There's no need for a second T, as in TTRPG. That's just wasteful of air and paper and typing and time. So please, just RPG or TRPG for tabletop role-playing games. Live-action role-playing games, LRPG, including LARPs. Electronic role-playing games, aka ERPG, which includes solo games and massive multiplayer online games, everything in between, VR, AR, VR, etc. And then hybrid role-playing games, HRPGs, which also include solo adventure books and modules. This episode is sponsored by the wonderful, wonderful Patreon supporters for the nonprofit RPG Research. We are also sponsored by RPG Therapeutics LLC and Dots RPG through their kind donations to RPG Research. You can learn more about RPG Research, the nonprofit 501c3 research and human services organization, studying the effects of all role-playing game formats and their potential to help improve lives at www.rpgresearch.com. A quick little quote from them. We are helping people heal and improving the quality of life for diverse populations around the world by providing accessible and inclusive collaborative research-supported programs using music and role-playing games. Researching RPGs since 1983, providing programs in schools since 1985, in therapeutic settings and online since 2004. A 501c3 nonprofit provides an open international community, sharing, studying, and providing accessible and inclusive collaborative music and games to help improve people's lives. You can learn more about RPG Therapeutics LLC, the for-profit professional services company, at rpgtherapeutics.com. 20% of their profits are donated to RPG Research, and the book publications, the profits are donated to RPG Research. And also the nonprofit Dots RPG at dotsrpg.com. They are kindly out there helping advocate for accessibility. They are creating Braille dice and sharing those freely, Braille textbooks, and much more. Check them out again at dotsrpg.com. Our show varies each week, but typically includes the latest general RPG news related to our focus on role-playing games and research, community response and discussion, role-playing game-related theory and application discussions, updates on communities and professionals using role-playing games throughout the world, and often special guests. The latest updates on RPG Research, the RPG Bus, the RPG Trailer, the RPG Tour, RPG Education, and many, many, many other programs that we're involved with in various degrees. And while our primary show hosts are typically Hawk Robinson and John Welker, hosts, co-hosts, and guests may vary from week to week. The RPG Talk Show will begin in a few minutes. This message may repeat. The RPG Talk Show discusses weekly news, information, commentary, discussion, and debate about the effects of all role-playing game formats and their potential uses for professional, educational, recreational, and therapeutic goals. The RPG Talk Show is not about the latest modules and releases. There are plenty of sources for that information. We will mention such releases when related to the aforementioned topics, however. You can learn more about the RPG Talk Show, hosts, guests, and archives of previous episodes on our website at rpgtalkshow.com. You can follow us on Twitter at RPG Talk Show. You can catch our show live on twitch.tv/RPG Research or on youtube.com/RPG Research, Thursdays, 4 p.m. to 5 p.m. Pacific Time, and chat with us during the live broadcast. RPG Research Patreon supporters can access the recorded episodes a month or more before they are available to the general public as a thank you for your support. You can become a Patreon supporter by swinging by patreon.com/RPG Research. Those videos will then later be available on youtube.com/RPG Research. Role-playing game formats we discuss include the original tabletop RPG, usually referred to just as RPG or TRPG. Please, either no T's or just one T. There's no need for a second T, as in TTRPG. That's just wasteful of air and paper and typing and time. So please, just RPG or TRPG for tabletop role-playing games. Live-action role-playing games, LRPG, including LARPs. Electronic role-playing games, aka ERPG, which includes solo games and massive multiplayer online games, everything in between, VR, AR, VR, etc. And then hybrid role-playing games, HRPGs, which also include solo adventure-focusing modules. This episode is sponsored by the wonderful, wonderful Patreon supporters for the nonprofit RPG Research. We are also sponsored by RPG Therapeutics LLC and Dots RPG through their kind donations to RPG Research. You can learn more about RPG Research, the nonprofit 501c3 research and human services organization, studying the effects of all role-playing game formats and their potential to help improve lives at www.rpgresearch.com. A quick little quote from them. We are helping people heal and improving the quality of life for diverse populations around the world by providing accessible and inclusive collaborative research-supported programs using music and role-playing games. Researching RPGs since 1983, providing programs in schools since 1985, in therapeutic settings and online since 2004. A 501c3 nonprofit provides an open international community, sharing, studying, and providing accessible and inclusive collaborative music and games to help improve people's lives. You can learn more about RPG Therapeutics LLC, the for-profit professional services company, at rpgtherapeutics.com. 20% of their profits are donated to RPG Research, and the book publications, the profits are donated to RPG Research. And also the nonprofit Dots RPG at dotsrpg.com. They are kindly out there helping advocate for accessibility. They are creating Braille dice and sharing those freely, Braille textbooks, and much more. Check them out again at dotsrpg.com. Our show varies each week, but typically includes the latest general RPG news related to our focus on role-playing games and research, community response and discussion, role-playing game-related theory and application discussions, updates on communities and professionals using role-playing games throughout the world, and often special guests. The latest updates on RPG Research, the RPG Bus, the RPG Trailer, the RPG Tour, RPG Education, and many, many, many other programs that we're involved in various degrees. And while our primary show hosts are typically Hawk Robinson and John Welker, hosts, co-hosts, and guests may vary from week to week. The RPG Talk Show will begin in a few minutes. This message may repeat. The RPG Talk Show discusses weekly news, information, commentary, discussion, and debate about the effects of all role-playing game formats and their potential uses for professional, educational, recreational, and therapeutic goals. The RPG Talk Show is not about the latest modules and releases. There are plenty of sources for that information. We will mention such releases when related to the aforementioned topics, however. You can learn more about the RPG Talk Show, hosts, guests, and archives of previous episodes on our website at rpgtalkshow.com. You can follow us on Twitter at RPG Talk Show. You can catch our show live on twitch.tv/RPG Research or on youtube.com/RPG Research, Thursdays, 4 p.m. to 5 p.m. Pacific Time, and chat with us during the live broadcast. RPG Research Patreon supporters can access the recorded episodes a month or more before they are available to the general public as a thank you for your support. You can become a Patreon supporter by swinging by patreon.com/RPG Research. Those videos will then later be available on youtube.com/RPG Research. Role-playing game formats we discuss include the original tabletop RPG, usually referred to just as RPG or TRPG. Please, either no T's or just one T. There's no need for a second T, as in TTRPG. That's just wasteful air and paper and typing and time. So please, just RPG or TRPG for tabletop role-playing games. Live-action role-playing games, LRPG, including LARPs. Electronic role-playing games, aka ERPG, which includes solo games and massive multiplayer online games, everything in between, VR, AR, VR, etc. And then hybrid role-playing games, HRPGs, which also include solo adventure games and modules. This episode is sponsored by the wonderful Patreon supporters for the nonprofit RPG Research. We are also sponsored by RPG Therapeutics LLC and Dots RPG through their kind donations to RPG Research. You can learn more about RPG Research, the nonprofit 501c3 research and human services organization, studying the effects of all role-playing game formats and their potential to help improve lives at www.rpgresearch.com. A quick little quote from them. We are helping people heal and improving the quality of life for diverse populations around the world by providing accessible and inclusive collaborative research-supported programs using music and role-playing games. Researching RPGs since 1983, providing programs in schools since 1985, in therapeutic settings and online since 2004. A 501c3 nonprofit provides an open international community, sharing, studying, and providing accessible and inclusive collaborative music and games to help improve people's lives. You can learn more about RPG Therapeutics LLC, the for-profit professional services company, at rpgtherapeutics.com. 20% of their profits are donated to RPG Research, and the book publications, the profits are donated to RPG Research. And also the nonprofit Dots RPG at dotsrpg.com. They're kindly out there helping advocate for accessibility. They are creating Braille dice and sharing those freely, Braille textbooks, and much more. Check them out again at dotsrpg.com. Our show varies each week, but typically includes the latest general RPG news related to our focus on role-playing games and research, community response and discussion, role-playing game-related theory and application discussions, updates on communities and professionals using role-playing games throughout the world, and often special guests. The latest updates on RPG Research, the RPG Bus, the RPG Trailer, the RPG Tour, RPG Education, and many other programs that we're involved with in various degrees. And while our primary show hosts are typically Hawk Robinson and John Welker, hosts, co-hosts, and guests may vary from week to week. The RPG Talk Show will begin in a few minutes. This message may repeat. The RPG Talk Show discusses weekly news, information, commentary, discussion, and debate about the effects of all role-playing game formats and their potential uses for professional, educational, recreational, and therapeutic goals. The RPG Talk Show is not about the latest modules and releases. There are plenty of sources for that information. We will mention such releases when related to the aforementioned topics, however. You can learn more about the RPG Talk Show, hosts, guests, and archives of previous episodes on our website at rpgtalkshow.com. You can follow us on Twitter at RPG Talk Show. You can catch our show live on twitch.tv/RPG Research or on youtube.com/RPG Research, Thursdays, 4 p.m. to 5 p.m. Pacific Time, and chat with us during the live broadcast. RPG Research Patreon supporters can access the recorded episodes a month or more before they are available to the general public as a thank you for your support. You can become a Patreon supporter by swinging by patreon.com/RPG Research. Those videos will then later be available on youtube.com/RPG Research. Role-playing game formats we discuss include the original tabletop RPG, usually referred to just as RPG or TRPG. Please, either no T's or just one T. There's no need for a second T, as in TTRPG. That's just wasteful air and paper and typing and time. So please, just RPG or TRPG for tabletop role-playing games. Live-action role-playing games, LRPG, including LARPs. Electronic role-playing games, aka ERPG, which includes solo games and massive multiplayer online games, everything in between, VR, AR, VR, etc. And then hybrid role-playing games, HRPGs, which also include solo adventure books and modules. This episode is sponsored by the wonderful, wonderful Patreon supporters for the nonprofit RPG Research. We are also sponsored by RPG Therapeutics LLC and Dots RPG through their kind donations to RPG Research. You can learn more about RPG Research, the nonprofit 501c3 research and human services organization studying the effects of all role-playing game formats and their potential to help improve lives at www.rpgresearch.com. A quick little quote from them. We are helping people heal and improving the quality of life for diverse populations around the world by providing accessible and inclusive collaborative research-supported programs using music and role-playing games. Researching RPGs since 1983, providing programs in schools since 1985, in therapeutic settings and online since 2004. A 501c3 nonprofit provides an open international community, sharing, studying, and providing accessible and inclusive collaborative music and games to help improve people's lives. You can learn more about RPG Therapeutics LLC, the for-profit professional services company, at rpgtherapeutics.com. 20% of their profits are donated to RPG Research and the book publications Oh, crap.
It's a one-woman show. They're going to be like,
I'm
what
not
is she
even sure
talking
it got that much. Thank you. Well, it was Kelly Dunlap who noticed.
Oh, Kelly. I know
Sorry,
Kelly.
thank you for
Hey,
pointing
Kelly.
it out. This is so we sometimes have a tech in here, and darn it, it's just because of the move. Sorry.
Well, we've been having a delightful conversation
time.
about
Unfortunately,
Common
not recorded.
Core, Bethesda.
What is your timeline? Are you able to go a little bit past the mark at all?
I can go a little bit past
Okay.
this.
How do you
Like
feel
15
about
minutes.
us doing a take 2? We won't be
Yeah.
able to cover the same depth. We'll have to accelerate it.
Right.
We will get rid of our tangents, but we can.
Yes. Let's
Yeah.
try it again for the benefit of everybody. So
Thank you, Kelly.
Thank you for noticing. All right, stopping the recording, switching the stream.
He's everywhere.
Let's go. Hello, and welcome to the RPG Talk Show. I'm your host, Hawk Robinson, with
John Wilker.
And Danielle Whitworth.
and joining us remotely from Ottawa, Canada, over Jitsi, we have
Dr. Rachel Kowert.
Welcome. We're so glad to have you here. Now,
Thank you.
we were streaming without audio there for a good 30 minutes. Sorry about that.
Wow.
Fortunately, a listener pointed it out, so now you should be receiving that audio just fine. And we're going to do a take 2, if you will, although we won't go into as much depth because of the limited time.
Right.
So we're going to go ahead and right into the news here.
In the news, GeekWire reported Dungeons & Dragons diversity and how the world's most influential RPG turned the tables on inclusion. This is a October 28, 2018, so it mainly focused on the artwork, the inclusion of people of various ages, the various ethnicities, and genders, which was a really good start. The later materials that they've come out with, for example, Waterdeep Dragon Heist, the campaign book that they have out, does include people of women in power and people that are handicapped, such as a deaf mute, a blind in one eye, various other handicaps. There are also people of various gender identities and preferences. So there are 2 men that are married. There is a non-binary person. One of the things from the Sword Coast campaign guide was the ability for elves, who are the favorite of Corinthian, to actually change their gender once a day.
Now that is fluid gender identity.
That is literal gender fluidity.
I need that in my D&D game. Are you watching?
There's also a transgender person that is in there. The only problem with the transgendered person in there is that there's no way to incorporate into the story that the players would have any logical reason to know that person's transgender. So it's Chekhov's gun. It's in the book, but it doesn't get used.
Okay.
Speaking of diversity, there is.
Well, let me interject because this is better. Because the next one's going to be about ethnic diversity, right?
Correct.
This one was more about gender diversity as well as others. So we're reiterating some of this, even though we talked about it with the mute version of the show. So a study I started in 2013 and then did a phase 2 in 2015. So 2013 was the year before Gamergate.
Right.
So it was a study on experiences of gender bias in the gaming community and industry. And I went around to a lot of local game stores and small conventions in the inland Northwest and had 164 respondents, 24% of which gave qualitative answers on the back explaining why they answered the 11 questions on the front. And then in 2015, part 2 was during Worldcon 73, which was a more diverse population from around the world. We had people from Norway and China and others there. I was only able to get out of 4,300 people, 124 respondents because it was such a well-run convention. There weren't very many cues to say, hey, how'd you like to fill out a questionnaire? How'd you like to fill, have all these clipboards ready. It was too well run. That's the bane of a researcher.
Yeah.
Great convention, not great for the research. I ran around for 3 days and I only got 60 something respondents. A lot of people wanted to, but they were en route to the next thing and they weren't waiting in line. And then the second half I got all in one day on Sunday because they were all in line for George R. R. Martin.
Right.
So, such a difference. But the general thing so far, and I still have to finish the report. We have qualitative analysis done. We have the quantitative analysis done. Now I have to write the report and turn it into something cohesive. And I am juggling so many things. It's been a problem. But, and then we have a WSU IRB waiver, so it can be published. The key point is that for the most part, most people reported not feeling excluded and not feeling bad experiences, with the exception of some of the artwork and, and some of the book covers. There's some of those things kind of recurring. But most of the people weren't feeling, and it was all gradients. It was Likert scales, so you got a feel of the degree of experience, if it was really extreme or minor, etc. However, the notable difference statistically is that the video game and collectible tradable card game, their very high numbers of experiences of gender bias, exclusion, harassment, because it was different types of gender bias, how it would express itself. They could choose and select that. And that's what I say, it's very multivariate. It's very hard to do the analysis on so many variables. Next time I'm doing a simpler questionnaire. But great data. And then tabletop and LARP was significantly lower. There was some, and it's sad to see that, and it was nice to get the qualitative responses that explained their particular experiences. And once those are sanitized, those are all things, eventually this will all be shared with the public. And so it's very interesting to see there, because we did it. So wargaming, we had none, but we had no female respondents to wargaming. Everybody who was female did not check the box for participating in wargaming. Collectible card games, video games were high. LARP and tabletop were relatively low. Also questions about the industry because of the artwork and the publishing, that was a little mixed, etc. So some great data there. Now you, of course, your background is primarily with the video game side of this topic, right?
It is, and inclusion and diversity are a real big issue, not just in gaming communities, but in the gaming industry. So within development communities, the people who make these games. There was a study in 2018 by Electronic Arts, and they looked at 2,200 people, and they found only 13% of them said they did not think it was important to make games more inclusive for diverse audiences. So the vast majority of people that they surveyed believe that video games need to be more diverse and inclusion, and have greater inclusion for ethnic groups, for gender, for sexual orientation, ableism, people of ability and disability, all of these different things.
One of my theories of why computer gaming had a larger issue than tabletop is because in tabletop you actually have to confront the person you are treating poorly.
Yeah, the non-anonymity behind the keyboard thing. That's certainly, people behave badly if they don't have to face the subject. Yeah,
I mean, there's a lot of research on that, and that's absolutely true. I just want to make just a slight point, because last couple of years, I've been on a real stint about the good and the bad, because I feel like they always say, like, the anonymity in games does definitely enable the trolling and the bad behavior. But it's also what gives us the best part of online gaming, which is the closeness and the relationships and the high levels of self-disclosure. And
not judging by appearance if you don't usually see each other.
Right.
Yeah.
So it gives us both.
Yeah.
You're right, John. It does definitely fuel that for sure. Yeah.
Like many things, a multi-edged weapon.
Yes.
Cuts both ways. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or tool, I should say.
Yeah. You're not going to be a jerk at your D&D game to, like, Gary next to you. I mean, you have to see him,
statistically.
Yeah. I mean, you might be. I mean, in my D&D game, sometimes. No.
Yeah, I've seen it happen.
I have too.
So, GMA News Online, your news authority, wrote a nice article. This was published December 23rd, 2018. 2 tabletop role-playing games that explore the Filipino and Asian experience. And Asia is home to many beautiful, diverse cultures, but strangely, it's a rarely tapped source of inspiration for fantasy tabletop role-playing games by RPG developers. Now, there is Oriental Adventures, and there are other problematic games that came out. Oriental Adventures got in trouble for using the word Oriental even though that was the correct term in 1974 when it was written.
Yeah, well, so for example, in psychology and everything back in the I worked as a nurse's aide and LPN trainee. You were an LPN and all that. And in the 80s and 90s, MR was the correct term for what now is, DD, DI, etc. And so, and certainly you have differences between the professional terminology and layperson terminology. And certainly we have cultural carryovers from the 1800s, etc. And that's the main thing they say about using the term Oriental is it's an antiquated term. Some people are more incensed about it than that. And it's certainly, the problem is it's not very accurate, right? It's so broad.
Well, and I have a problem with how we, as a culture, are starting to just continuously change terms as people add a negative
tough
effect.
to keep up.
Because, it's going as far as bicyclists. They're no longer bicyclists. They are people who are biking.
What?
Because
Or
experiencing biking. Because bicyclists are negative for people who are sitting in cars. Because the bicyclists I have to pass and stuff of that nature. And I think it's just gone way too far. And we really need to look inward and realize,
that's
are we
an
just
interesting
putting
one.
negative out into the world because we're putting negative out into the world? Or are these terms actually derogatory?
Right. Well, and certain things we have to take them out. So, for example, with MR, it became used as a highly derogatory term, unfortunately, right? That was an escalating thing. And so both the profession and laypersons decided we really need to change that. The challenge is with the internet, the rate of change is so much faster, and languages change, cultures change. Otherwise, they're dead languages.
Yeah.
So, professionally, it's a pain in the rear, right? We have to keep up with all this terminology already. We have to keep up with all the new science and everything else, let alone have to change the terms that we reference what we're trying to talk about. Manic depression, bipolar type 1 and 2, right? It just keeps changing. But part of it is specificity. So you hear me rail about it too. It gets frustrating. Yeah. Sometimes it seems overly reactive, and sometimes it is totally appropriate in some of these areas. That bicyclist one? Oh my goodness, are you kidding me? That's a new one.
I have not heard that.
That's a new one for me.
Is that a Seattle thing?
No, DC.
Oh, it's DC. Okay. So
I'd love to see a link for that one.
One of the issues that they have, that people have had with the cultural representation in role-playing games, is they're written by people who don't have anything to do with that culture.
Middle-aged white old guy.
Right. So if you're writing about Boris Karloff level gypsies, you're going to offend people who associate that with Romani.
Yeah.
So Once Upon a Time in Jianghu, it was written for Philippines by a Filipino. Once Upon a Time in Jianghu is an Asia-centric RPG-inspired wuxia, a genre of fiction involving the heroic adventures of martial arts. The game is set in a fantasy realm known as Xia, whose religion and culture resembled Asia's. Players play honorable heroes whose deeds eventually free the world from the Yellow Emperor's tyrannical rule. This was written by Toby Abad. Shihai.
Or Sihai, one of the other.
Sihai.
Yeah.
Sihai. Of course I'm going to mispronounce it.
Not in your language.
Right. Now, that same author also did an article in lifestyle.inq, or it's lifestyleinquirer.net, about how to respond when your child asks, "What is gay?" And he gives a real reasoned comment about it, and very sensitive, and everything he talks about.
So it's a compassionate response.
Correct. Unfortunately, these good things that he's been doing have been overshadowed by him being banned from Philippine tabletop RPGs for alleged abuse. There is no...
We don't have much information.
We have no information of what type of abuse it was.
What's out there, yeah.
He could have kicked a cat. I have no idea. So they are researching what he's done. Everybody has to present their evidence to them, just as if this Facebook page was a court. And they will decide whether or not to keep him permanently banned.
Okay.
Gallant Knights Game and Wonderworks made a statement regarding his Once Upon a Time in Jianghu. And basically it boils down to, we have canceled the Kickstarter for this project.
That's a big deal.
Yeah.
It is a huge deal.
Yeah.
It's costing him a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
He's done a lot of work, and he's not going to get anything for it unless he can prove to Gallant Knight Games, and even if he can prove it to Gallant Knight
Even if he turns
Games,
around, the tainting effect could make it impossible to ever restart.
That's why I have such a problem with canceled culture currently, is that we're just attacking people to attack people.
It's a fine line. I mean, you know, shame storming going too far, and yet other times totally appropriate. It's again, tools could be used in many different ways to do help and harm.
There are people that need to be deplatformed.
Yes.
Yeah, driven out with torches.
Yes.
But after they've been proven guilty.
There are also Salem witch trials examples of where that can go too far. So it is really very challenging. And that is the danger of mob mentality, if you will, versus through the legal system. But the legal system has been letting a lot of groups down, and so what else? You know, that's where rebellions happen. So it's very problematic.
That's why we have such a high cancel culture right now, and that's canceling people publicly, like
deplatforming them, shadow banning them,
not subscribing to any of their social media or anything else where they put out information.
Sure.
And
my only problem with it is that the accusation is enough to ruin a person's career, regardless if they're innocent or not.
Yeah, and that's the danger. That's the problem there, where when it's not rule of law, and then there's the benefit or the burden of proof. You don't have any of that when it comes to these types of approaches, and it does ruin lives. And people have been found out to be innocent, and they're never able to undo the stigma. So that is, you have to be so careful with these things. Do you have any comments on that before we move on there, Rachel?
No, what you just said at the very end. That was what I was going to say. So that's great.
Be careful.
Yes. Don't be so quick to judge. Yeah. I mean, of course, if people are doing things wrong, they should be punished for it, of course.
Yeah.
But
I was telling you how, you know, this diverse background, and we were talking, as you heard me talking to my son on the phone and such, and one of the other areas of training is compassion-focused therapy, and also been a volunteer for the Dalai Lama's compassion program of the last 6, 7, 8 years, and you used to help drum up getting people going to his big compassion thing in Seattle years ago and such, and so the Dalai Lama, his approach would be to not go like, okay, maybe somebody has done something terrible, but as an Ent would say, don't be so hasty to judge, right? Give it, just, you know, we don't want to let people do bad things and get away with it and all these horrible things, but try to come from a perspective of compassion. And CFT, one of the key tenets is explaining to people from the neuroscience and the CBT perspective, with, you know, compassion layered on top of that, explaining why they do what they do. And then finally helping them come to terms with, now that you understand how the amygdala and the hippocampus and all these other things and adrenal cortical steroids, all those things work, do you understand now why the CFT context for this workshop was about anger management, right? Rage control and such. Why you do the things you do. And this is also applicable with PTSD and such. To help people to start forgiving themselves and forgive others. And often it's easier to forgive others than yourself, but some people it's the other way around.
Right.
And come at it from a more compassionate perspective. And that's certainly something we need to see a lot more of, that would help tone down a lot of what's really been accelerating, I think.
Yeah.
So
well, there's a thing in psychology called the fundamental attribution error. And
yes.
Yeah. So it's, you attribute negative behaviors of someone else from something internally wrong with them. Like, oh, they're late to class. Yeah. They must be a slacker. Well, but when it's you, it's totally different.
It's one thing to condemn the behavior. It's another thing to condemn the person and their core character. Right. You cannot change your core person of who you are. You can make huge dramatic changes and everything. You can't change the past. And you certainly can change your behaviors going forward. But to say to somebody, your core self is evil.
Right.
What can you do with that? The response is going to be to push back.
But it is, humans are what my teacher used to always say, we're cognitive misers. We're lazy thinkers, right?
Yes.
We take the quickest path from A to B.
Yes.
So we have to, that's where compassion comes in. And that's the
Yes.
perfect analogy. It's like you have to take the minute to not make the jump that your brain
Yes.
naturally wants to make.
And anybody under about 25 who doesn't have the myelination between the frontal cortex and your animal brain, that's a real challenge, because the override circuit's running so slow. You've got the response, you turn at the left-hand turn signal, even though you cognitively know better, the signal's too slow to get there. Your brains haven't finished developing until about 23, 25. So that's a big issue there too, for that impulse control factor.
Yeah.
And especially with emotions like that.
Yeah.
So taking a breath, taking a beat. Oh, that's such an important one. Before you rage type and click, go.
Take a breath.
Let's think about this for a second.
See, that probably fuels into the cancel culture.
Yeah.
It does.
Yeah.
The inability to do that. Yeah.
One of my concerns is the separation between the messenger and the message.
Yeah.
The author and the art. Because right now it is inappropriate to read anything written before 1978.
Based on current standards, most of the which
Piers Anthony,
his answer,
he's wrong. Famous singers, everything. Everybody had these different opinions and stuff, and we're basing things that, like Oriental Adventures, that was the correct term. Yeah. But now we're horrible people because we used a correct term in that year.
The beautiful thing about role-playing games is they are easily adapted and malleable.
Right.
And we can use these to help build that compassion. We have seen with our programs with ADHD kids and at-risk youth and autism spectrum and all these others, how we can help them learn to take turns, hold on to themselves, right? Wait till their turn rather than just blurt out at the impulse. Think about consequences of actions, learn causality, learn about what your actions do to others, think about the group context. All of these wonderful things come from role-playing gaming. And whether it's playing in a group game online or a tabletop game or a LARP game, you have opportunities to learn these things. And that's, so just want to tie it into role-playing gaming since this is an RPG talk show. That is an area that we can help build that more compassion-focused approach in all of our games, including our video games and such.
Yep, and then transfer the knowledge.
Yep,
to
exactly.
Other situations. Yep.
And research shows that this modality of teaching through role-playing gaming, where from the neuroscience perspective, you have a lot of that self-referencing effect where you can help use that to relate to the story more. When you can create a character that you can relate to who's other than, now you can start tying that in. It's going to stick more. That you can do learning in layers, learning in distributed over time rather than mass learning. All these other benefits can be experienced through the role-playing game format, and then it's going to stick better. So use it wisely. It's a tool like anything else. Use it carefully, and the research shows it can be really helpful for these types of situations, for growing empathy and compassion and such.
Yeah.
Say the word again.
Bethesda.
Bethesda. For some reason, that word doesn't like my mouth.
I think it's because when you see it, it doesn't look like Bethesda. Oh, it does.
It does look like Bethesda, but I'm trying to make it an Egyptian word out of it.
Yeah.
Bethesda pulls promotional Elder Scrolls Dungeons and Dragons module following plagiarism accusation. This was reported on Wednesday, 8 May. Today, they actually made their comment to it. We pulled a previous shared ESO tabletop RPG adventure. That's Elder Scrolls Online tabletop RPG adventure. While we investigate the source, thank you to those who reached out with our concerns. Thanks again to everyone who highlighted the issue of alleged plagiarism in relation to ESO Elsewhere tabletop RPG promotion. Our intention had been to create and give away a unique Elsewhere inspired scenario that could be played with any popular tabletop RPG rule set. We requested that the original scenario be created, and we are investigating why this scenario does not appear to be the case. We have removed all assets relating to this and asked, in respect to the creator of the original scenario, that it should not be circulated. In other words, if you got a copy, please don't share it.
And this is not like the Neil Diamond Heartlight.
No.
ET
I love this
violation of
analogy.
$25,000 they had to pay for just an idea. This was full-blown, blatant, copy, paste, slightly change the words around.
Yes.
Plagiarism. Classic plagiarism.
This is something that has been happening to lots of other companies where they hire someone who isn't in their core to do something,
Yeah, outsourcing.
and you have to outsource. That's the only way these bigger companies can
Compete.
continue.
I'm one of those
They are.
evil people who used outsourcing and still does use outsourcing.
But in order to maintain that, we have to put in checks and balances,
Yes.
and lots of them are not.
Yeah.
And it
come from
happened
countries
to
where
Jeffree
there's
Star
no consequences.
Cosmetics.
Yeah.
It's happened to Hot Topic is a big one that does it all the time, and they constantly are pulling things from their shelves from lawsuits, and it's something that people are just not thinking about.
Yeah. And the RPG industry, not the video game side, but the tabletop and LARP side, doesn't have a lot of money. 40, 50, 60 million in a year is a huge improvement from 2008 when it was 20, 25 million.
Right.
But compare that to the board game industry that was 300 million in 2008, now 1.6, 1.8 billion. And then compare that to the video game industry, which is in the tens of billions, who do have more money to try to do that for the video game side. But on the tabletop side, where they don't really have the school infrastructure to automatically catch plagiarism and all of that,
Right.
I could see how this could slip through. You trust that somebody's not
Yeah.
going to try to pull a fast one on this. So I don't blame the company for this. Whoever did it,
Yeah, whoever produced it.
shame on them.
Yeah,
We
for
didn't
sure.
experience this as RPG research.
With Fiverr.com trying to get original artwork, and
Yeah,
I
the
about
other
30 different
yes.
artists, and a bunch of them tried to send me stuff that was clearly copy paste from other artwork and then kludged them together. And I'm like, dude, I can do a better job in GIMP. Come on. But don't do that. That's just wrong.
Yeah, we're frozen.
Give me original. What? Oh, your camera quit? Thank you, Windows, for unplugging your camera. Oh, no. Oh, it didn't. That's just delayed. You're
That's
just.
the live broadcast.
That's just. Yeah, this is
Yeah.
live. This
No,
is.
but I didn't look like
This
you were
is
moving
delay.
at all. Oh, there
Okay.
we
That's
go.
because you were listening to her talking before. Remember
Right.
latency. Yeah, so we got a whole bunch of screens up here. You can't see it, but and we're still in the new studio, so everybody's getting used to everything. We just moved everything this
This
weekend.
is day one of the new.
Oh, and I
studio.
should say it is May 13th, 2019.
Yeah.
Okay. Also, I want to make clarify that the Elseworlds tabletop scenario was blatantly plagiarized from DDAL 05-02. That's Dungeons and Dragons Online, Season 5, Scenario Number 2, The Black Road. It was published in 2016 by Paige Leitman and Ben Heisler. They're the ones who get the credit for the module. And just an example for the audience who didn't get to hear it last time.
Very quickly, because we
Very quickly, I'm just going to give one example. The caravan carries a number of goods in addition to the statue that are of value both to me and to the people of Parnasse. That's from the Black Road. From elsewhere, the statement is, my caravan has, besides the statue, even more goods of value, both for me and for the people of Rimmon. There's no question about it, and this is not a
There's example
single
after example after
It's
example.
Page
Yeah,
after
you can
page
look this up.
of
Yeah.
constant stuff. So that is what happened to Bethesda. Related to that, Tresca
Michael Tresca, Italian from N-World.
has been doing a thing and writing about it in N-World, game design like a Boy Scout. And they're working on a game design merit badge. They did, probably not coincidentally, a part on Article's latest series of workshops for the 20 plus BSA Scouts for the Game Design Merit Badge. In this installment, we jump ahead in time a bit to cover some aspects of the workshop, including intellectual property. So even the Boy Scouts are learning about the ramifications of these things.
I mean, they're blue or purple.
I was really wondering why she didn't wear a blue shirt.
Well,
All right.
I'm
Relevant to
being an
that.
imposter.
Relevant to that, we have a little bit of a parallel to that. So we, at RPG Research, there's a lot of learning to do. Our volunteers are long-term commitment, a year or two or more, and it takes a lot to learn. There's just a lot of information. And we've been trying to figure out how to track that effectively and kind of just let people know how they're doing. So one of the things we've done is just raw hours. How much as a volunteer do you show up? Well, to tie in both Paranoia, the role-playing game, and Star Trek.
Which is one of our favorite to play.
Paranoia, for just fun. And we would not use that in therapeutic settings, but it's fun in other areas. I don't know if you're familiar with the Paranoia role-playing game.
Mm-mm.
Are you at all familiar with Logan's Run from the 70s?
No.
Okay. It's a dystopic, people live underground, and there's a mad computer controlling everything.
Got it.
So anyway, and it's humorous. It's darkly humorous role-playing game, and you have 5 clones because your characters get killed very quickly, and a new one shows up from a vacuum tube, and then you've got your new one. And it's very silly. It is the antithesis of other role-playing games because it's much more competitive than cooperative in a lot of ways. You're trying to backstab and get one up on the other. It's a lot of silly fun. Anyway, they use a security thing of Roy G. Biv. So if you're a citizen, not a troubleshooter who's an adventurer, you're infrared, you're black clothing. And then if you're ultraviolet, you're the high programmers. And everything in between is the rainbow of colors. And it starts with red. And then, of course, Star Trek, you have the red shirts. So new volunteers, so there's 0 to 99 hours, are red shirts.
That's why I said I'm
but
to be a
it was getting a little expensive to get shirts for everybody and all of that. And we're trying to figure out a less expensive way to still represent that. So for the moment, we're playing around with these different sashes of different colors of the rainbow. And so when they get over 100 hours, then they go to orange and yellow and green and blue all the way up. So after 2,000 hours, then they got purple for violet. So John and I put in way more than that. That's as far as we've got it going. But then
I'm not going to do ultraviolet.
Well, then that would be me because I'm the high programmer. But then because these are sashes, and we're talking about the Boy Scout thing, we've been talking about having little buttons. Because we have checklists, so we have Game Master Level 1 trainees, and they learn how to run a game. They sign off on different games, so if they get that, we have a little button they can put on there. So, parallel. Yeah. Anyway, something we're looking into. Because people like those little tangible rewards, token economy, things like that.
People love achievements. Video games thrive on achievement systems.
Achievement unlocked, exactly.
Yeah.
Any other topics you had in there?
Last topic. Stranger Things Dungeons and Dragons explores trauma through tabletop RPG. So they came out with the Dungeons and Dragons basic set Stranger Things edition,
which we did an open box intro of when it came out, like the day it came out. Yeah.
And the article is about how this is actually being used as a form of therapy. Now, this is in-game therapy for the fictional character that supposedly wrote the book.
Not the player therapy, the character's therapy.
Yeah, the character's therapy.
Okay.
The character from the book, not the characters in the story.
So Will?
Yeah.
Is it his
No, Will
diary?
is the one that...
Oh, he's the GM.
Actually, it is Will.
Oh, okay. Well, he's in that little, like in the very beginning, he has his...
Yeah,
so
that's
grab
Will.
the adventure.
The adventure, yeah.
Yeah.
So the first season of Netflix Stranger Things, a group of kids from Indiana fight a monster from a parallel dimension. Once the Demigorgon, named after a demon from Dungeons & Dragons, is defeated, life pretty much returns to normal. Then season 2 comes up and things go crazy again. But in the game, the kids play Dungeons & Dragons. So this is the module that the kid wrote, the fictional kid wrote. So the Wizard of the Coast newest starter kit for Dungeons & Dragons is themed after Stranger Things. The adventure contains within its contents Hunt for the Fessel Hydra, an original campaign, quote, written by Mike Wheeler, played by Finn Wolfhard of the show, and adapted directly from the first season. We wanted to give you a chance to play through the adventure that they had played together, and we had to make it feel as if there was something that the original originated in the world of Stranger Things. If I get the right part where I can skip ahead to my point. The thinking was Mike had just been exposed to this creature, Merles says, that's Mike Merles from Dungeons & Dragons. A lot of dungeon masters draw inspiration from comics and movies they watch. So the way Stan approached it, Mike is drawing inspiration from what had happened to him in real life. We sent the players into Mike's take on the Upside Down and what they were confronted the Demigorgon. This is a working through his post-traumatic experience from fighting the Demogorgon with his best friends Dustin, Lucas, Will, and Eleven. The Demogorgon in the game, which appears in the midway point before the players take on the Fessel Hydra, Mike is confronting the very same monster that he survived on his terms. So we've all been talking about using role-playing games as a form of therapy. This is an example of the role-playing game that is, the writing of it was being used as therapy for the fictional character in the story.
Very meta.
Layers upon layers of meta here.
Our meta has meta.
Yeah, well, we have one of our roles. So we have game master trainees, advocates, facilitators, writers, etc. We also have what's known as a player archetype specialist, which I don't think anybody else has ever come up with. The player archetype specialist, so you know what archetypes are from the Jungian concept, and we're not talking about those. But we are talking about a parallel of those, of you have players who go to, they have very extreme set of traits that really show up, and then what's really important is the ones who are disruptive. For example, the rules lawyer, who can just shut down. This isn't tabletop stuff, right? But you can have it in a video game too. You can have people just going haywire, arguing about that in the game. But this is a phenomenon more in LARP and tabletop. The rules lawyer can completely shut down the flow and fun of a game, arguing about the rules. And I have found through dealing with this for decades, but then applying a therapeutic approach, the ones who are highly disruptive generally come from a level of high anxiety. Many of them, as I've interviewed them and such, they come to role-playing gaming because they don't feel they have any control in their real-world life. And then their life may not be chaotic at all. It may actually just be really boring. Some come in because it's the only chance they feel to get to be a hero and stuff like that, right?
Or only chance they don't get yelled at.
Right. Well, there's all, for at-risk youth and stuff. So there's a lot of different things, reasons why they feel they don't have control in their life. And they come to gaming because it gives them a form of control. And then rules lawyers especially, the rules create predictability in their lives. These are clearly defined parameters I can count on, and then you're going to mess that up? Anxiety! Right? It is, for some people, it is a hugely upsetting experience. And I've learned how, and we train our game masters when this happens, how to de-escalate them in the moment and then turn them into an ally rather than a disruptive force. It takes several sessions typically to have the full effect, but we do train our GMs on how to do that in the short term to keep the game going. And there's techniques for making sure that they show that you have to show them that they're being acknowledged, that they're being heard. So you give them a method of hand me a Post-it, write it as a note, we'll talk about it during the break or after the game. Now, first, they don't trust you that you'll do that, but as soon as you do, that you do talk to them during the break, and you say, okay, I understand that. That's a really good point. I did change this rule because in my setting, the physics are a little different, so that's why I do it this way. But I will, let's try this out. As long as it doesn't break everything, I will stick to this. I won't keep arbitrarily changing things. And here's some of my other house rules. You try to do that up front, and that helps a lot too. And if it doesn't work out, okay, we'll roll it back. If it, you can point it out to me if it's breaking things. Once you've done that a couple times where they realize they're being acknowledged, they learn to hang on to themselves. They don't have to kill the game, but they can write it down in the notes, and you'll talk to them after the game, or you hand them a Post-it and they'll address it. They become handy because I don't always have I play so many different role-playing game systems now. I get them all jumbled now, unfortunately. And so I have to rely on, if I can identify to the traits of a rules lawyer in the group, I lean on them for that, to say, hey, can you help me with the rules and stuff here? We don't want to kill the game over it, but I'm going to time to time ask you to check something or just let me know what the rule is. They love that. Their anxiety comes way down and they feel even safer. So these are techniques we train our GMs to. First of all, you have to learn to identify the traits of that. The other one, we're supposed to change the terminology for, but the gaming community calls the murder hobo, right? The person who comes in and just wants to kill everything can be highly disruptive to a game if they take it too far. All of these, we call them archetypes rather than stereotypes, because an archetype's a baseline of a group of traits that can be a whole range and expansion and is not exclusionary. You can overlap many of these. Stereotype, generally, you put somebody into it and that's it. That is all they are, is the traits of that stereotype. So we use archetype rather than stereotype. And you will see people who have traits of it, and some people it doesn't stand out. And if they're not disruptive, it doesn't matter, right? Then it's just play style, and that's a whole other thing. So we train some volunteers to be player archetype specialists to be the disruptive players. So the GMs get practice dealing with these disruptive players, and then how to identify them, de-escalate them, etc.
Person always on the phone.
Yeah, whatever the reasons. And then we have a second level tier for educational settings, a third level tier for therapeutic settings, so autism and brain injury, etc. So anyway, that's just something talking about very meta there, meta on top of meta, because they have to play this thing and this thing and this thing.
Yep.
Okay, so that was the last one you had?
That's it. We should be talking about our guests.
We're going to talk about her show. I just wondered, what about the one from New York about the $100 an hour GM that I posted to you?
Oh, I forgot all about that.
Yeah, there was an article this week from a New York TV station about a game master, dungeon master there, making $100 an hour in New York full time as a paid game master. So, congratulations, that's awesome. We need to see lots more of that. So we just want to just quickly throw that out, that was just out just this last week.
Right. There wasn't much on the article other than the fact that
and the video clip. Yeah, and he's just using a battle mat and a marker, and it was nothing special. But people who had a little extra money and wanted a premium experience, this is exactly what we've talked about for decades.
He's not even using the Platinum Edition.
No, exactly. You don't need to. That's the thing. So for those of you who don't know, I've been gaming since '77, John since '79, Danielle's more recent, just a couple of years.
2017.
And I was a paid game master by '83. People paid me, and I was 13 running games for college students on up. So this isn't a new thing. So I'm very glad to see this fellow doing this. I'm irritated that it's taken this many decades for people to go, yes, you should. If you want a premium experience, you should pay somebody who's really good at it to do it. And it's okay to do both, right? You have musicians who play for free and musicians who charge, and some are better than others, and it varies, and it's a choice. A lot of people get lambasted for charging for role-playing games.
But mad just bringing it up.
Yeah, just bringing it up. You'll see these long hundreds and hundreds and thousands of threads on Twitter and YouTube and Facebook when you bring up being billable as a game master. And I've made upwards of 250 an hour as a game master, so I'm extra evil. And then, our GMs, start 20 an hour on up. So.
You darn capitalist.
How dare you charge to give a premium experience?
Well, and lots of training, and we try to have certified and all of that. And it's like any other profession, with the therapeutic background and everything, there's a lot invested in there. And if you want to be able to do it full time, you've got to be able to pay your bills, right? It's one thing we're all volunteers here at RPG Research. Mm-hmm. RPG Therapeutics, helps pay the bills. And it's great if we want to help people on a volunteer level once a week or something like that. But the rest of the week, we got to make a living. And if it happens to be something we're really good at, and the market is okay with it.
How is it any different than renting a video game? Is what I don't understand. Besides, I show up and I have physical things.
It's just a new thing. Yeah. Like anything else, people are resistant to change. Mm-hmm. It's improving. So this news article, this video, is another one. There was another one last year in the New Yorker, New York Times, or something like that from another guy. So it's great. We're seeing the momentum building. This is great. And this is part of the reduction of the inculcated myths and animosity towards gaming and gamers. Now, it's still pretty high. It comes and goes with the video gamers, right? We still got that because the violence keeps getting associated with that. Tabletop gaming really got the brunt of it in the 80s and 90s. That's been largely diffused, although it's still out there. Now it's really hammering on the video games. And they always want to point to the Bobo the Clown routine and modeled behavior and all these other things. And yet, one of the key factors, as you probably are well aware, is trait-based aggression. Right? That's one of the big differentiators. It's not about the game, per se. It's about the individual. If they don't have trait-based aggression, the video game's not going to do anything. They're not going to score higher on aggression after doing they're going to be activated. They got the adrenaline going, and they're going to be more, responsive. But you let them cool down like anybody else, and they're no more violent than they were before. Now, those who do have certain anger and aggression trait issues that already are an issue, then it's going to activate those traits. But it's like all these other tools we've talked about. It's not inherently that tool in and of itself. Now, there's a lot of variables there, and we're making huge general statements, which is dangerous, of course. Mm-hmm. But would love to hear, now we can segue to you, because we're now talking about video games, about your thoughts and opinion. And first of all, go ahead and give us your full background and related to all these things.
Sure. My name is Dr. Rachel Kowert. I am the research director of Take This, which is a nonprofit organization that provides mental health information and resources to the gaming community and the gaming industry. I am a research psychologist. I am a parent of 2 small children, and I've been studying video games for almost 15 years, with a specific focus on effects, media effects, both positive and negative. In regards to aggression and violence, because I can't let it go, I have to talk about it.
Please, please. No, that's what I was asking you to. Please.
You're absolutely right. So when we look at these studies, when we look at the wealth of research that's looked into the relationship between playing violent video games and different outcomes related to aggression and violence, first of all, the vast majority find no significant effects. The small minority that does is the ones that get all the press, number one. And number two, what they actually find is short-term changes in aggression. Now, that sounds bad, right? Short-term changes in aggression. But if you dig further in the research, you realize the way they're measuring aggression is not particularly great. So it'll be like word completion tasks. You bring someone in and you see K-I blank blank.
Effect.
You say kiss. And then you play GTA, and then you say kill.
Yeah. You're talking about related to Stroop effect and things like that?
Exactly. Yeah. And this is what these conclusions are based on. And a lot of people don't know that because you just see the headline, aggression goes up, but it's really he completed this word differently, or she. And then, that was directly after. 15 minutes later, the effect is gone.
Yeah, and from the neuroscience perspective, these are interference variables. They're causing cognitive interference factors. Mm-hmm. And after your adrenaline calms down, they go away. They don't have any long-term effect. By the way, we talked extensively about this topic a few months ago because a lot of the ones that claim the video games are causing the violence have been from a handful of people, some of which now have had their PhDs revoked because their studies were so flawed and they intentionally falsified data and kept reposting additional data over the last 10 years. So we have, we talked about the other show, let's see, Ohio and Arizona are the two I could come up with on short notice.
Arizona was the PhD student of the professor at Ohio State.
Right.
Yes, and and it's interesting too because the conclusion with violence. So there are these handful of studies about aggression, and then the headline gets transformed into it contributes to violence. But there is literally not a single study. There's zero. There is zero evidence linking directly video games to any kind of real world violence. Yeah. And if you look at the general statistics, video game consumption has increased significantly over the last 20, 30 years. And violent crime among youths, which is important because the youths under 18 have the most time to play video games. The youths. No, I'm no longer in the youths. I'm not under 18. They have the most time to play video games, and they're also the ones who are thought to be the most influenced by media messages. Mm-hmm. So their rate of crime is steadily declining as video game consumption, the rate of violent crime.
Well, and here's an important thing about violent crime in general. This is where exposure to so much media that we get now. We have constant bombardment of between the internet and our cell phones and everything else and radio and all of that. Violent crime in general in the United States has been on the decline for decades. Mm-hmm. And yet if you survey people on the street, everybody believes it's higher than it's ever been. Not everybody, but statistically, the majority of people will say, no, it's much worse than it's ever been. Yeah. I lived through the 70s. I was in California. I was in Oakland, California, studying martial arts as a kid. I was the only white kid for blocks, basically. And let me tell you about street violence and such. Oakland was a war zone all the way until not too long ago. They've now gone through gentrification and it's transformed, though the rest of California now is, unfortunately, a second world country. It's really deteriorated. But the 70s, we had riots all over the place, the gas shortages, people if you look at the statistic crime from the 70s, it was really bad. It was, I think, close to about as bad. I think the only time worse before was the Depression era, right? It was really, really bad time economically, everybody emotionally, the malaise, etc. And then the 80s, were a mix. But then since the 90s, that violence has been decline. And yet, if you survey people, they don't feel it. Because we had three broadcast stations and PBS in the 70s, right? In most neighborhoods. Now we've got cable and satellite and the internet and our smartphones and our satellite in our cars. And so we're bombarded with bad. Here's another one.
It leads.
What are you aware of what the current status is of starvation in the world?
No. Can't
So
say I am.
we grew up with, there are people starving in Africa and people starving in China and whatever, don't waste the food and blah, 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 blah. And there have been huge efforts to try to turn that around. Well, for now about 20 years, starvation levels around the world have gone down, 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 and now are no longer the world's biggest problem. You know what the world's biggest problem is now from a health perspective, World Health Organization?
Obesity. I'm sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Especially in first world countries.
But if you survey most people on the streets, they believe that most of these other countries are starving. And now it's like 20% or something of what it was. It's really, again, room for improvement. We want to keep improving. Most of that's because of warlords, things like that. It's a fraction of what it was, but people aren't aware of it. And so with the game violence, all they're hearing is the headlines.
Yeah.
And that gets inculcated deeply.
It is, and it's catchy, and people want an easy solution to a big problem.
Yeah.
And they say, "Oh, it must be the youths and their video games."
Well, and everybody wants to point to Columbine. Everybody goes back
right,
to Columbine.
but yeah, it does. And I love the statistic that's shared a lot by Chris Ferguson at Stetson University and Andrew Sabilsky at Oxford. They talk a lot about how people who commit violent crimes statistically play less violent video games than people who do not.
Statistically, yeah.
Yeah,
well, and the same thing,
but people are always surprised by that.
Yeah, we had the same thing with tabletop. So through the 80s, and it was really two people who caused this inculcated negative stereotype about role-playing gaming, tabletop role-playing games.
Patricia Poling.
Good. I should quit you guys. And Dr. Come on. It's on the test.
It was there.
Radecki. Dr. Thomas Radecki, who's now in prison.
She took the easy one.
So, Patricia Poling, her son unfortunately killed himself when he was a teenager. She blamed D&D for it. She then made it her life's mission to try to stop that from happening to anybody else. So you can understand from a compassion-focused perspective why this woman was driven so intensely. She couldn't undo her son's death. There was probably a lot of, I know, as a parent, lots of parental guilt about, I should have seen something, I should have done something, what can I do? And it's that control thing, right? When your world's out of control, you've got to do something, right? Something must be done, which are very dangerous words. And so she formed an organization called Bother About Dungeons and Dragons. And she was on 60 Minutes. She was on Canadian Broadcast Company. They were everywhere. And then she paired up with Dr. Thomas Radecki, PhD psychiatrist out of Illinois or Indiana or something like that, who formed the NCTV, the National Council Against Television Violence. This is all going to come back to the video games for you here in a minute. Which he was part of. He's not the only one, but he was a key part of the movement towards what eventually became the V chip in all the televisions, the violence control chip, right, and the ratings on video games. All this comes back to this in the 1980s, and they lobbied Congress heavily to try to make role-playing games illegal on any government-funded facilities. Luckily, it didn't get very far. However, they did independently get all the prisons in the United States to ban role-playing games, which now is only a handful that have, through efforts of individuals, slightly turned around, but most prisons still ban role-playing games, just blanketly. And there's a 2011 Supreme Court ruling reinforcing that. 2011 Supreme Court ruling reinforcing that. And libraries, schools, they had a long list of schools that banned role-playing games. And so prior to this happening, you had these photos of these huge role-playing game clubs, 60 kids in a role-playing game club or something. Then you watch the next year, 30, then the next year, a handful, and then gone within 3 or 4 years. They banned role-playing gaming across all these schools. It had quite the ripple effect that we are still feeling today. Now, she eventually later died of cancer in the 90s, and her organization then fell apart after that. But that inculcated attitude is still there. But it is what started the research, because they made all these claims that all these kids are committing suicide because they happened to play D&D. It was because, or role-playing game in general, that's why they killed themselves. And they had a list of about 128 names. So then Blackmon and others did research and put together all the aggregate data and found, no, actually it turns out the suicide rate of role-playing gamers is 1/5 to 1/20 that of non-gamer peers. In the 90s, this study was done on college students, showing that the non-gamers, 43% or so, scored high on meaninglessness. Only 17% of gamers scored high on meaninglessness. Also, psychoticism, which is a better predictor of criminal behavior and violence, etc., was much higher in the non-gamers than in the gamers. So this all ties in with exactly what you're saying. So what once was old is new again, and it just keeps coming up again and again.
Yeah.
But here we are again with these the Ohio State PhD and the Arizona State student, who they've gotten tons and tons of press coverage for the last 10 years, putting out these bogus reports, and it was on CNN, it was across all the cable news networks, the regular broadcast networks, and that's now what people believe. Even though it's been retracted, nobody says anything. You don't see that on the news.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's like John said, if it bleeds, it leads. People are attracted, triggers negative information, and it's just, it must be the video games. Let's ban them. I feel like there's a trend now, at least it's starting. I'm trying, but other people in the field as well, about looking at the positive side of video games, or at the very least the not negative side. When people ask me to give like a general statement about video game effects, I say at the worst, it's neutral. Like the effects of any media, honestly, on us, television, video games, radios, comic books, D&D, is neutral or slightly positive. Mm-hmm. If you look at the wealth of research.
In overall statistical. Now, you do have outliers because of mental health issues.
Mm-hmm. Always.
But that's the bell curve.
You have outliers.
Yeah. But statistically, exactly. And which shows that in and of itself, the tool is a neutral tool. The rest is characteristics of the individual.
Environmental factors, internal factors,
Yeah.
I'd like to hear a little bit more about your book, A Parent's Guide to Video Games.
Yeah, so I published this book a few years ago. The idea was all parents hear the negative headlines, and there's a whole bunch of wealth of research in the field of game studies. It's been growing a lot in the last 20 years. And I wanted to get that information out of the ivory tower, which you were talking about, Hawk. It shouldn't belong in an insulated community if we're doing this research. Yeah. Surely we're doing it for the parents. I mean, who are we doing it for, right? So I wrote this book called A Parent's Guide to Video Games, and I just tried to summarize the different aspects of research that we do have a lot of information on in the field of game studies, and write it in a way that's accessible for parents. So if they want to know, how does it affect us socially? How do games affect us in relation to violence? They could just read like 3 pages about it and get 20 years of information.
Which I bet the people who did all that work and everything are like, oh, come on.
I know.
You just summed up 20
really
years.
A challenge.
20 years
really
of my life. Oh, no, I would be. But imagine doing 20 years of work and you sum it up in 3 sentences.
The whole time you're talking about the spaces that relate back to the book, I'm like, do I smell an oh my god, I just lost the word. I had it. An aggregated
meta-analysis?
Meta-analysis.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so you use mostly meta-analysis in those studies, right?
I used as many meta-analyses as I could.
Right.
I was just wondering if you were doing a meta-analysis of all of the meta.
No, oh my gosh, no.
Meta of the meta?
Yeah.
Yeah, no.
Let's layer some more.
Yeah.
So in doing those studies, so you do the same, so we have to do the same thing whenever we present at conferences, etc. We mostly don't preach to the choir at fandom bubbles. We mostly go out to professional conferences and other places, and literally on the street, because those are the people who need to be informed. Fandom, we're preaching to the choir, so we don't spend that much time in fandom conferences. And even in the professional conferences, psychiatrists, psychologists, nursing, social working, rec therapy, all these, we have to spend easily half of our initial presentation just listing the research that disproves all the inculcated myths. There's about 12 to 20 different things, depending upon the group we're dealing with, that we have to go boom, 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 bullet, and then we have to one by one shoot them down. Because otherwise they're like a dog with a biscuit on their nose going, I'm waiting for my turn, and they won't take in any of the great news we have to share until you get that biscuit off their nose and deal with all those issues. Then their cup is empty, and now they can take in new information. So we always have to bring up all this stuff of the past. We've gotten some grief for doing that. Like, why do you keep bringing up the past? So because outside the gaming bubble, it's critical to move forward. And in those areas outside the gaming bubble, there's still so much negativity, whether it's the video game version, whether it's the tabletop version or the LARP version. The 1982 Mazes and Monsters movie with Tom Hanks still has an impact. So many people associate the steam tunnel murder LARP person who went crazy thing, which didn't happen. Right? They completely flated the Dallas Egbert III case with the Mazes and Monsters thing, and it's so aggravating. And that's still in the cultural psyche big time.
Yeah.
And gets then powered into the video games as well. Now,
how long has it been since somebody said those people kill people?
So in March this year, we were up at Deer Park Library doing our drop-in RPG. And we had multiple families literally drag their kids away because they were saying we don't let people we don't play those kinds of games. And one mother overtly talking loudly towards me while she drags her kid away because the kid said, "Mom, why can't I play this?" Said, "We don't play those kinds of kids, son. People who play those games kill people." As she's dragging her kid away, but making it so I can't have a conversation. Right? I've had many very successful conversations turning that around. Not allowing for that. I would have to pursue her into the parking lot, which would not be a good thing.
Don't do that.
So she got to have her say.
I'm not a murderer. Let me
She got to have her say.
Goodness.
She was letting us know, and we had 3 out of 4 families surveyed, literally drag their kids away, and then the 4th family let their kids come in, and she had 7 kids, and she was in shock. She's like, "They're not squabbling, they're getting along. I don't believe, what is this thing? I've never heard of this before."
Magic?
Great. Thanks. And so she gave it a chance against all of that, and wow, it was transformative and amazing.
Oh, that's great.
But that was 3 out of 4 families, and that is not too far off of my experience so far of running into people, both professionally and laypersons, about their attitude. So we have a lot more work to do.
Yes. Yes, we do. And we're trying.
We're
trying.
And inroads are being made.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. I mean,
So
the information has been so kept away from
these
general
damn
population.
silos.
Yeah.
Let information be free.
I know.
So what do you have going on for you now and on your horizon?
Yeah, well, I'm doing a lot of work with Take This now.
Mm-hmm.
We are going to release a white paper in the next month or so about diversity and inclusion in games in the gaming industry. So that's exciting.
Where would we find that?
On takethis.org.
Okay.
It will be released. I am currently in the throes, you'll like this, of editing a book about how games, role-playing games, tabletop games, and video games contribute to our well-being.
Wonderful.
That is currently in development. That should be out next year. And tonight I'm playing D&D on Clinical Role. If anyone wants to come watch me on Twitch in about 20 minutes.
Oh, that's what you have next. Okay, all right, yeah. And is it Megan? Is it Megan Cottle? Wonderful, wonderful.
We'll have to catch it afterwards because we're also broadcasting in about 20 minutes.
Yeah, 6 to 7 is our so 6 to 7 is our admin meeting, and 7 to 10 is either RPG theory or applied gaming on Sundays and Mondays for us.
We could either butt up against Critical Role or Clinical Role.
Yeah, we can't.
Rolled up.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you knew, back at PAX Unplugged this fall, I was out there on some panels there with Dr. B and the Adams and Megan and all that.
And Megan, awesome. So, that's great.
You were asking if I'd interact with it. I'm like, oh yeah,
yes,
we pass each other's orbits many times. So
we're like basically family, you know.
Yeah, we try to be. I have, unfortunately, I apparently have big boots and unfortunately step on toes inadvertently, and so that presents some challenges, but try to work through all that. I guess that's like family too, huh?
Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
So give them my best. Say hello to them for me, please. And,
I will, for sure.
Because we're all trying to. For me, it's all about sharing, because by doing all this, the rising tide floats all boats.
For sure.
And
that's a nice
so
quote.
that's been. That's what we got to do. I'm a big open source advocate, and so we try to make everything free. So. It's wonderful you're doing what you're in now. So you've got this, you got to Take This, you've got the show you got to go to shortly, you got the book coming. Any other research studies or other little projects you got going on we should know about?
Nothing that is in a finalized state. Okay. I have about 100,000 things on my whiteboard over there, but you know the drill. Yeah.
Understood.
The white paper will be great. I'm really excited about the white paper.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Looking forward to that.
Next month. Yeah.
That's terrific. Well, thank you so much for joining us here. Sorry about the technical glitch at the beginning, and thanks for being a good sport about doing a take 2 on that. A take 2 before you do Take This.
Yeah, exactly.
Anything you guys want to say before you wrap up?
Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you.
We appreciate when it's not just us talking.
Yeah. So this video, we stream live. The recorded version will then be sent to our Patreon supporters as a thank you at patreon.com/RPG Research. We're a 501c3 nonprofit studying the effects of all role-playing game formats, tabletop, live action, electronic, and hybrids, and their potential to help improve lives. And then we also run a lot of community programs using these, and then that feeds back in. And then we share all this publicly. It will go to the Patreon supporters for a month, and then after that, it is freely available to everybody on our YouTube channel, Twitch channel, and on rpgresearch.com. So thank you for joining us. We'll be back again Monday, 4 p.m. Pacific time, right here on youtube.com/RPG Research Pacific time. And our website's rpgtalkshow.com. We're on Twitter at rpgtalkshow. And wherever you may be well, happy gaming, and namaste.
Dream well.
Good night.
Night.